I'm Mary Henley, president of the Midland Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated. Thank you all for joining us today for a contemporary conversation that offers multiple perspectives on community, Black America, and the united road forward. Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, our national organization, was founded in 1913 by 22 students at Howard University. These young women wanted to use their collective strengths to promote academic excellence, to provide scholarships, to provide support to the underserved, educate, and stimulate participation in the establishment of positive public policy in the areas of economic and educational development, international and political awareness and involvement, physical and mental health. The Midland Alumni Chapter was chartered March 17, 1984, and has worked tirelessly to promote the goals of the national organization in our service area. We are actively implementing the goals of the sorority through programs many of you listening may recognize. We have awarded over $32,000 in financial support to various service agencies in the community. We have a collaboration with the American Heart Association to increase awareness for prevention in the areas of heart health, stroke, high blood pressure, and cancer. We have awarded over $100,000 in local academic scholarships to high school seniors. We actively participate in voter registration drives and public forums regarding social issues. We offer cultural enrichment for families and children. Many of you may have heard of our Super Saturday program or our current STREAM programs, science, technology, reading, engineering, arts, for students and parents grade 3 through 12. We are excited about tonight's program. We have distinguished panelists and community members focusing on the book, Disintegration of Black America by Eugene Robinson. So I'm excited about tonight's discussion. I originally arrived in the Midland and Mount Pleasant area in 1979 as a student and remained to raise a family here. I look forward to the lively discussion and will speak with you all again at the end of our program.
Thank you for that welcome, Mary. We are excited to have the Midland area community join us this evening. Community Conversations with the Deltas is a thoughtful exploration of the challenges facing the African American community as we strive toward universal goal of achieving an anti-racist society. The purpose of this event is to provide a flat platform for community conversations using the book Disintegration, The Splintering of Black America by Pulitzer Prize winner Eugene Robinson. This two-part series will use experiences of African American and African heritage community members and other community partners to explore opportunities and challenges in our service area. Participants will leave with ideas for how to personally commit to improving racial equity in our community. The book presents the African American and African heritage population as now divided into 4 distinct groups: the abandoned poor, immigrants and people of mixed race, the mainstream middle class, and the small but powerful transcendent elite. Think Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, and Michael Jordan. While the book was initially published in 2010, and one could argue there have been even further splintering from the initial groups, we believe the foundational concepts in the book are still relevant as we look at our Midland community today. The racial equity opportunities and challenges we've already experienced and still face. Today's panel will bring some of those lived experiences to life and challenge us all to consider our role in promoting a more racially equitable community. You will have an opportunity to engage in the conversation by using the Q&A feature on this call to pose questions to the panel. Some questions may be selected during the discussion, but most will be reserved for the Q&A portion of our agenda after the discussion. Please do use the Q&A feature for questions to the panel and not the chat. This is a community forum that celebrates the respectful flow of ideas and concepts. Thank you for your support and consideration. In the event we experience a digital disruption that ends the forum, we will try to reconnect. If not successful, we will share next steps, possibly a follow-up event date, via our chapter website at www.midlandmidst.org. Now I'd like to welcome the panel, Dr. Betty Jones, Erin Patrice, Brandon Lewis, Barbara Johnson, and Linda Holloman. So panel, what do we say? How about we get into it? Let's get it going. Let's get it going. So for those of you who were able to read the book, across the 10 chapters, you sort of experience a historical perspective on what happened before the splintering, and then you get into the actual splintering, and then what has happened since then. And so our panel tonight is loosely connected to the flow of that book, as some of our initial questions will explore the past, present, and future, but eventually we will just get into some free-flowing discussion. So to get us kicked off, Barbara will actually start the conversation with Dr. Jones. Barbara, go ahead. On mute, and you're on mute.
I can see you.
Yes. In the book, Disintegration, Eugene Robinson describes the splintering of Black America. So let's start by talking about what Black America looked like before splintering, with a focus on the Midland community. One of our panelists, Dr. Jones, has researched Midland history for many years and has a very important perspective on this topic. Dr. Jones, I've heard that Midland was a sundown town at one point in its history. So would you tell us, what is a sundown town, and is that true?
Well, I assume that sundown means that everybody's off the streets at sundown. Is that it?
Yeah.
It was kind of like that. But let me tell you a little bit about our first experience with Midland. I discovered that Midland had a Black population before we got there. I started my notes first in the 1960s, okay? And that was the time that Dow Chemical actually went out to recruit and begin to develop a diverse workforce, but they started very slowly. They brought the first family in 1960. That was Dr. Lynn and Faye Dorman. And the next family, who were Ron and Sandy Horton, did not come in until 1964. So there are 4 years between that. And then after that, they started getting in African Americans more quickly. So by the time we got here in 1968, I think there were 9 we were number 9, actually, number 9 family. It was really a very interesting time too, and perhaps that played into how slowly the things went. The nation was really in national upheaval at the time. We'd had assassinations going on, we'd had civil rights legislation being done, and there was a lot of resistance. And people in Midland were kind of, I think, in a bubble. They didn't really want to look at all that. They actually saw Midland as a very perfect community. And I always remember that the editor of the Midland Daily News wouldn't print bad news about Midland. If it happened, he wouldn't print it because they didn't want it. So if you really wanted to know what was going on, you had to read the Saginaw papers or the Bay City papers to find out what was going on in Midland. But at any rate, it was a safe community. When we came, people were friendly, very curious. Many of them had never come in contact with people of color before. There was a lot of nervousness. I was trained as a professional social worker, but I couldn't get hired in Midland as a social worker because there was concern that if I had to do home calls, that there would be resistance among white parents. And so, however, I was hired by the Bay City Department of Special Education, and I worked in Bay City for 7 years before I left to go to Delta College. I went to work on my doctorate at Michigan, and then was hired at Delta College. I'd say that the local residents in Midland were apprehensive, but they were curious. But one of the things that I also noticed was that in terms of being a Black woman, we were really quite different than the women that we found. And one of the things that I remember was, as curious as people were, they had morning coffees, and I was not accustomed to going out for coffee in the morning. But I went and I met a lot of people that way. And I learned that white women in Midland were not permitted to work because it would say something about the ability of their husbands to support them. Well, I did work, and not that my husband couldn't support me, but I worked because I had been educated, had a degree, and wanted to work. And it was interesting, after about several years, I noticed that some of my neighbors, women, were going back to school and thinking that they might work too. So I have a feeling that this interaction was a bit contagious. There weren't many of us, but we tended to educate each other. We used each other as a resource. And one of the things that we did, which I think was very wise, is that we wanted to integrate our voices within this community. And we did that. I mean, we did it methodically. We joined organizations, we brought talent, we brought ideas, and we helped things to happen. So that was my early experience with Midland. And that's how I came to believe that we were creating something that would be worth recording, worth having that story.
You know, you talked about coming to Midland. You talked about the welcome that you got when you came to Midland. Tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, pre-splintering. I think it would be very interesting to understand what your experience was there.
Well, I didn't grow up in Orangeburg, although we had friends there. Columbia was the capital. We attended segregated schools. There were Black schools and white schools, and they did not mix. We were not permitted to compete in any way. I remember that I was in high school, was on the C.A. Johnson choir, and we had a very good choir. We sang all over the state. And finally, we got an invitation to sing at Columbia High School. Our director took us and we sang. They were very appreciative, but they did not return the invitation. I mean, they did not come to our school. So that was one thing. But you know, we had a lot of football games, and you met people that way all over the state. I was in student government, et cetera. But what I remember about Columbia and how different it was, and how grateful actually I am that it was, is that there was togetherness. The church held you together. Your neighborhoods held you together. You know, it was like you had parents, but everybody in the neighborhood took care of you. And you better behave yourself, because your mother would know about it very soon if you did not. We didn't have to lock our doors. People just looked out for each other. You didn't have to worry about being mugged or anything like that, because somebody was taking care of you. You knew that. It was a safe neighborhood. The streets were unpaved. And I can recall that during a time my mother that she called dog days, we got a lot of rain, the streets would be full of water. And we thought it was great fun. I mean, we would go out and play in the water. But I learned afterwards, of course, that that was negligence. So, but I think the difference is that we didn't have a lot of things. We just didn't. I mean, everybody would be poor, but we didn't know that we were poor. My mother was the domestic. She worked with a white family, and then later, because she was a skilled seamstress, she got a job at the nearby Fort Jackson, and she worked there for the rest of her, until she retired from there. But um, the difference, I think, was that we had a greater bond, and we also felt a greater responsibility. Um, I can't tell you, I would not trade the education that I got in Black schools for anything that I have seen since then. I just wouldn't. We didn't have things, but we had values, and we were taught how things were important, and that what you did reflected on other people, reflected on your family, on your neighbors, on the race, So when I went to school, to college, and I have to tell you, I think I was well invested in. I've been mentored. I've had teachers have taken an interest in me. When I went to college, they wrote me, they put a little few dollars in the envelopes to make sure that I would have something to spend. I always said I went to college on a wing and a prayer because we didn't have money. I did get a scholarship, and I worked on campus, and I got those little dollars from people who cared that I was there. And I knew that they were proud of me. And I always tell my kids, I did not have the luxury to fail. I just did not. And I knew that. So that was one thing. And I'm really thankful for that experience because it has followed me throughout my life. And the things that I remember from Columbia, and also also from Hampton, is that they always said that what you get, if you are fortunate, you have to give back. So I always saw it as an investment, and I think I was well invested in. And so it's hard for me to say no to anybody really when I know that I might be able to help. It's very difficult. My husband tells me all the time, just say no. It's not that easy to do because it's part of who you are. And
Thank you so much for sharing about where you came from. I think you're truly a trailblazer in coming to Midland as early as you did. What was it? And you talked about coming to Midland, but what was it like raising your family here?
well, we had two sons, okay? They were both athletic and they participated in sports in Midland, but I spent a good bit of time at school. Um, most parents were active in terms of being there for, they baked the cookies and all of that. I'm not a home person like that. I mean, I don't do baking, but I did offer other services. I went in sometimes and told stories. I can do that, and I love to do that. My husband certainly visited the school and shared his skills, and he's a photographer. So both of us were involved in that way in school so that our kids knew that we were there for them, even if we weren't supplying the cookies. But I thought that Midland really, at the time we came, really kind of bent over backwards to make sure that Black families were felt accepted. And I really think that the company had a lot to do with that because, they were heavy players. I mean, they provided jobs for most of the people. There was Dow and Dow Corning. And I was surprised at how much time I learned that they spent before the first family came checking out. They actually went and conferred with Black families in Bay City and Saginaw. and wanted to make sure that there would be friends for the dormants when they arrived. And I understand that these couples actually came to Midland and went to a couple of churches. They did their homework too. So that by the time the dormants arrived, there were not Black faces in Midland, but there were Black faces elsewhere who made themselves known. And another thing that Dow did was that they made sure that the real estate community, you'd be interested in this, Brandon, that the real estate people knew that Blacks were coming to the community and they wanted them to live in neighborhoods with other people. They did not want a Black neighborhood. So the real estate people we found out later, not when it was happening, but later, that they would go into neighborhoods and actually where there were open houses and talk with the neighbors to ask if it would be okay if a Black family moved in. Now, nobody had any trouble, okay? In our neighborhood, actually, we told them they integrated us because there were no houses out here. We bought the land and we built our house. So other people moved in, but that didn't deter anyone. So.
Well, one last question before we turn it back over to Lisa. What has been the biggest challenge that you feel that you faced as an African-American woman living in Midland?
I think my biggest challenge has always been education in a way that was not offensive. I've always felt that you can't call people racist when they don't know. What you don't know, you can't act on. I found a kind of innocence. People were scared, and I'm talking about white people, were scared. They didn't have any prior experience with people of color. They were reading the papers about violent acts in Detroit, and they didn't know what was hitting them, actually. So really, they had to learn. I've taught classes at the community center in Black literature. I have served on boards. We were just getting started with the mental health board. I served on those boards. I worked with the MBC and chaired the cultural committee for about 10 years. And we put on book and art fairs. We did, we started the first Black History Month celebration we did. And we invited white friends and parents and children, and many of them came. So I think the greatest challenge I had in the beginning simply was to show people that we were normal. We had many different rich traditions, which actually I think many people started to enjoy and teach their own kids. So.
Thank you. Lisa?
Thank you so much, Barbara and Dr. Jones. That is an excellent foundational perspective for us to have, which is important in any meaningful discussion. So let's shift now to Linda and Aaron. We're going to progress a little bit through the book and come into present day a bit. And I know Linda has some pretty good questions for Aaron. So Linda, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I do want to say one thing about what Betty mentioned, and she mentioned the MBC, and I'm not sure if people on the call know what that is, and that was the Midland Black Coalition. It was the first Black organization that was in Midland, so I thought that would be interesting to share because you got that in, Betty, but I'm not sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Aaron,
Yes.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, and basically we're going to continue initially along the educational route. Now that we're in the middle part of the book, what do you think that Black Americans seek approval of the majority, whether it's in a K-12 school system, where we send our children to, or the colleges we choose to attend, or the community we choose to live in, or the places we choose to work? Do you think we seek approval from the majority?
So, yes, in short, yes, I think we do. And I don't think that we do it always consciously. I think that, and this is just my opinion on this, I think that we have been kind of taught a narrative in regards to what is right and what's acceptable. When you think about good neighborhoods, when you think about good schools, when people say good communities, or we've always kind of been taught that narrative. I mean, and I have really studied this a lot because I really like this topic, because I think that a lot of times we don't realize the narrative that we've been given. Right, we don't even get it sometimes. I mean, even when you look back to slavery, Black was kind of bad, white was right. It was this idea that if the lightest that you are, you're brighter, you're smarter. And we were taught that. And then when you even go up to, the civil rights movement, it was this idea that we had to fight to even go to a local bakery to be able to be allowed to get a donut from that shop, because it was a white only shop. And then we started getting into the mindset, and of course, I didn't live through that era. This is all through, talking to people and reading and studying. But, it was this mindset that was the goal to meet. That was the goal to reach, that we could get into that building and then we were complete. It was this idea that we had to almost be accepted by certain communities. And I think what happened to us, and especially when I read the book, it really came back home to me, because it kind of echoed some things that I thought. It was this idea that, once we meet that, then now we're 100% human, we're 100% complete. We've reached, this pedestal, and really, we were already there. We already had bakeries. We already had tailors. We already had that. But it was this idea that was better. So we had to be able to be accepted. And I think it's kind of moved right into right now, where, sometimes we'll go to a certain neighborhood because it's all white. It's just a reality where we'll, so I grew up in the inner city. When I moved to Midland and I saw the street sweepers coming, cleaning the streets, I was like, oh, wow, this is nice, and I mean, they came regularly, and, there was no trash. So it's this idea that, and of course, I mean, you can get into classism too, but that's a whole different thing. But when you talk about this idea, I think that we do that sometimes, not always knowing it, but it's kind of been ingrained in us to be able to go to a certain school because certain schools have the resources. So when they have it, you want to have your child to have a better experience. So I think we do it sometimes because, and then it's this domino effect. So if you don't think that your neighborhood, because you think you're inferior and that neighborhood is superior, you don't treat your neighborhood right because you don't think it's worth anything anyway, and you're not really much, worth anything. So it's this domino effect that I think that we have, kind of taken on, not realizing it. And that's why right now, a lot of Black communities are trying to say, your hair is beautiful, your skin is beautiful, trying to build that back up, and making those type of things, like you said, the Midland Black Coalition, different communities like that, where people feel accepted, where they can empower each other and be able to grow.
Okay, well, thank you. So then how would you compare your childhood then, your childhood educational experience, we'll talk about that part, to your children's educational experiences here in Midland?
So I really want to kind of echo a little bit of what Dr. Jones said in regards to the morality part that we were taught. Growing up, I mean, you were taught community, you were taught love, you were taught that all of us are one, and you may not have had the best books, you may not have even had a book, you might have had to share a book, it just depends on what school you went to. They didn't always have the resources, but there was still a sense of community where you would have the barbecues, you would have just the togetherness. For my sons growing up here, I mean, the education, of course, was superb. I mean, when I came here, I was like, this is free, because growing up in the city, you have to pay for, an education like this at a private school or a charter school. So I was just like, oh my goodness, this is awesome, But I think that, of course, when it comes to what Dr. Jones said too, in regards to the educational part, they're not taught their history. So sometimes you feel invisible. I know I've talked to numerous people who were raised here, and I said, I want to understand, because I couldn't even imagine being raised in the school system here. And that's no shot to them. It's just, for me, I was so exposed to, all year round Black history. We were celebrated all year round. And here, you may have it, in February, Dr. King or Rosa Parks, and that's kind of it. I think they've grown a little bit more. They're trying to do a little bit more now and be a little bit more inclusive. But, like I said, the educational, to be able to say, I went to Midland High School or Midland Public Schools can get you into a good college. I mean, so that part is, it is great, be able to put that down on your resume, so to speak. But I think it's lacking inclusion a lot. I think it's lacking representation. And when you don't feel represented, you feel invisible. And if you don't feel seen, it's just a domino effect. So I think, that's a difference for me.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that. So I'd like to move into a slightly different direction.
Sure.
And again, taking into account of what was spoken and shared in the book, some scholars today and civil rights activists purport that reparations is the first step to equity and healing. What are your thoughts on that topic?
How long do we have? No, I'm kidding. Okay.
You got a couple of minutes.
couple minutes. So in short, I say that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So there are a lot of communities that have gotten reparations, right? So why not? But also one thing that I always try to echo is that along with reparations, our communities need to be taught financial literacy, because a lot of us are not taught about credit. We're not taught on, how to buy land or even grow your own food and how to do that as a form of, finance. I mean, that's a way to live if you know how to grow your own food, or how to invest or what to invest into or how to invest in yourself. So yes, I mean, sure, reparations are great. But when you kind of throw it out to people with no type of financial literacy, what are you doing with it? So I think that whole idea of generational wealth, because I'm gonna tell you, and I'm just saying this, and this is all generally speaking, but my white friends, they know generational wealth. They know how to get, different assets and be able to pass that down. I mean, we talk about it all the time, and it was stuff that I didn't learn about my credit till I was an adult, like adult, and I had already messed it up. And I'm like, oh, this is important. So, I mean, I think financial literacy is something that we need to really push into our communities, as well as, being able to get those reparations, because when it comes, how are you going to use it? How are you going to invest in yourself? How are you going to make sure your family is set for generations, not just at that moment?
Okay. So the movie Black Panther was phenomenal.
Yeah.
One that all of us were very proud of. Yet many of our own people continue to produce movies and TV shows like Shonda Rhimes' Scandal or Tyler Perry's The Oval that are dysfunctional, and they portray stereotypes and the worst type of behavior of us. Robinson referenced in his book, The Color Purple, and he stated, showed a pattern of behavior that can only be described as subhuman. So are we in a place today in society that we can depict ourselves any way we want to?
So sure, yes, we have that creative license, right, where we can. I try to encourage people to, again, this is about an investment. So investing even in how you see yourself. I don't really watch a lot of Tyler Perry's stuff, and that's just my personal preference, because I do feel like it kind of perpetuates a certain type of stereotype, especially of Black women, where it looks like sometimes I don't know if he likes them, and that's just my personal opinion because of what I see continually throughout his work. I'm proud of everything that he's accomplished. I mean, that's a whole different thing, but I think that, a lot of the movies that, and I find that interesting that you asked that too in regards to Midland too, because I remember when I first moved here, every Black, quote unquote, Black movie that came to Midland was one of us like in a goofy form. It was in a form of, it was all that type of representation. And I actually spoke to, NCG a couple of times in regards to that, because it was troubling for me that I had to go to Saginaw to see like movies like, say, for instance, The Great Debaters or something like that. I'm just throwing out movies that show us in an education educational light or, a positive light, we would have to go to Bay City or Saginaw. But if you wanted to see something like a Tyler Perry movie or something else that slapstick type, goofy humor where we were like, the stick up kid or, a loud ghetto, people would see that. And you know what they told me? This is the God's truth. They told me that those are the ones that sell out here. And that bothered me because it was this idea that that's what sold, that those reinforced stereotypes is what people wanted to see of us, and it bothered me. So yes, I think that people can do whatever they want as far as creative license, but I think we should do better to make sure that we are representing the totality of us,
So many African Americans across the country have had similar and painful treatment by the police. Have you had similar experiences here in Midland? Or are you aware of any aggression towards Black in Midland by the police?
Oh, no, I'm kidding. I have. Yes, I will tell you a quick story. My brother was here visiting. This was years ago. My children were little, and it used to be a movie theater in the down there. What's that on? Waldo, no, whatever the street is where it's like attached to gimmicks and all that stuff. It used to be like a dollar movie theater there by the hotel and stuff. So we were going there and we're driving down the street, and granted, I might have been speeding. I can't say, I don't remember that or not. And we were stopped by the police, and my children were in the car. My brother was in the car. He was passenger. I was driver. Police officer said, where are you going? And my question was, can I ask why I was stopped? And he kept wanting to know where we were going to the movie, right? And it was literally right across the street. And long story short, he wanted my brother to get out the car. He wanted to question on why he was here. And unfortunately, my brother left his ID at my mom's house. So had to call her to bring it. But the point is that he wanted to question him on where he was going, why he was here. Let us know that there were a lot of people moving in from Saginaw and Flint area, robbing people. And this was the police officer that told us this. And I just remember being so infuriated because that was not my first time dealing with a police officer or any type of people in I guess,
Authority.
Authority. Thank you. So it was very troubling. And I remember just being very upset. My brother, of course, was upset, but that was one experience. And of course, with my children, I remember one time they were at the fair. Everybody stands around the fair. That's what the fair is about. People stand around. And it was a group of them, mostly Black and Hispanic. And I think maybe one white, two, they have friends all kind, but mostly Black and Hispanic. They were standing there together. And the sheriffs came up and asked them why they were standing together. They looked like they were in a gang. They had on regular clothes like everybody else, no type of scarves or anything, and told them to disperse because they looked like they were in a gang. And it's that idea that all of you together, clusters together, was threatening or intimidating or whatever. So my point is that, yes, I've had it happen several times. And I also think that people who are in a certain class, if you don't work it down, if you don't, not in certain circles, you get it even more so. So I think that's exactly what the book is talking about, how we have these different layers. And sometimes even within our communities, we don't recognize that we even treat each other like that.
Okay.
So yes, the answer is
Thank you for sharing that. And I do have one final question for you.
Sure.
And it's what is the biggest equity challenge and opportunity that you feel we face in Midland?
I think it's representation again. I mean, I'm a big advocate for representation. I think that if you don't see yourself represented, you don't shine as bright. It's just a reality. I help women when they have babies as a doula, and even when you go to the Midland Hospital, there's no picture of Black babies on the wall. The last time I was there, it was, Asian babies, white babies, but no Black babies. So if you're a Black mother coming in, you may be scared and you don't see that any Black babies were born there. You might question some things like where the Black babies at, or even in the schools with proper, the teachers, or, people, in different, I guess, different positions throughout Midland, you don't see a lot of representation. So that's one thing that I think is something that kind of hinders the inclusion aspect, which impacts people. If you don't feel, again, if you don't feel heard or seen, you don't work as well. You don't live as well. You don't thrive. And that's just my opinion. I really believe that. And I think that if we had more representation and people say, hey, because there's a lot of Black people that live here that people would never know even live here, because we don't go to the mall. We don't go, I don't ever see anybody until and I'm like, oh, you still live here? So I think that if we, were represented more, and even like books in the schools, different things like that, I think that people would thrive a little bit more. And other people who are not used to seeing people of color, Black people in certain positions, would be a little bit more comfortable if they start seeing some Black teachers. They wouldn't feel as threatened. Or if you start seeing Black police officers or whatever, you may not feel as threatened if you start seeing people. Because I know when I first moved here, kids used to point at me and say Black, and they used to point or like be, and I mean, I wasn't here when you guys back in the 70s. This was just 20 years ago, and kids would point and be like, oh my God, who are you? What are you? So I think that if we just had more of that, we kind of cross those bridges a little bit more and be able to have a little bit more where people thrive a little bit better.
Thank you so much, Erin. I'll turn it over back to Lisa.
Thank you so much, Linda. And so for those in the community who have read the book maybe, or even if you haven't been able to read the book just yet, we are crossing some of the groups that the book talks about. Again, the immigrant mixed race community, abandoned, mainstream, and maybe not so much as the transcendentals. I mean, we don't have any Michael Jordans and Oprahs with us today, but the lived experiences we're hearing about are definitely presented as construct in the book. So we're bringing you the experiences today. But again, if you haven't had an opportunity to read the book, and you do take the opportunity to read the book, as we've provided a lot of community resources to help people do that, these stories will resonate even more. So Brandon, it's our time now. We're going to shift into the later chapters of the book, which talk about, Black Americans and what would have then been the 2010s, 5, 10s, and really leaves the community, the book asking the community, what's next? What's next? So the first question I have for you is around thinking about investing in the community toward equity, right? Comprehensive community programs, we know, are expensive because they, particularly on this topic, in this vein, because they attempt to address structural inequality at many levels. And I love the fact that Erin brought up reparations, because one may think that may be a way to accomplish it. So how do you think, and we know that you are well versed and well connected in the community, how can this community justify and prioritize that kind of investment for racial equity in the future?
I believe they have to want to, which is the biggest. The resources are here. The money is here. There's a lot of people who have great hearts. I've seen them get money real fast for certain projects. For one of my biggest, I saw the STEM school that they placed in a lower income area. I thought that was genius work by the city. The placement of putting it there to give those kids a little bit better chance than your more higher income areas of Sieberts and Chestnut Hills and areas of that way. So I believe it's more of a want to.
Mm-hmm. Simple enough.
Yes,
it has to be a want to, right? Right. So again, we're going to lean on you and your community connections for organizations who are working toward social and racial equity. How do they connect today? Again, from your observation, and how should they connect in the future?
Well, if you know anything about Midland, we like our meetings. So as it is right now, there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of table this and table that. And sometimes I feel, let's get to the action. Let's move this along. I believe that it's more of just the regular citizens getting together in doing things. I'll never forget the Delta Sigma Theta ladies, who my mother is a Delta, so shout out to all the Deltas. They brought in the Tuskegee Airmen to Plymouth Elementary when I was in 6th grade. That is something that has stayed with me, and not just me, but also it stayed with the kids that I graduated with, white kids that would have never, for the most part, ever heard that story, you know, in elementary school. To have those living legends in our gym to speak, to talk with us was absolutely amazing. And it came from a small group of ladies that, you know, came together to do that for us. And I think that's really moving forward in the future. It's got to be more us. As much as I absolutely love Dow and I love the foundations, sometimes I think they don't move quick enough and fast enough. And I believe if we get things pushing, people always like to show up with checks on the back end after, you know, everything gets rolling.
So, and you mentioned again, let's take action. Can you think of a place here even recently where action would have been really good, right? Something that maybe pops into mind, but for whatever reason, even if it's pandemic related, we weren't quite able to make a move?
That's a very good question. I am on the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Board for Midland Public Schools. This board has been around for almost a year and a half. We have sat, we have talked, we have discussed, we have cried, we have held hands, we have prayed. There was an incident with a elementary school child where he was called a name. And for me, for us, for a whole year and a half, for us to sit here and do all these things and something happens and there's no contingency plan, super duper frustrating. And for me being the way that I am, I'm, you know, 20 of us in a room in 3 or 4 hours, we can come up with a contingency plan. You know what I mean? We're talking about a city who had a mass flood and things went absolutely flawless. You know, getting people evacuated, moving things from here. So it's those little things that irk me, but it goes back to what I said before. It has to be a want to. Things can get done if you want to.
Okay. So we're going to shift a little bit more into your personal experience. And recognizing, again, experiences may vary greatly among families across the county. But what has been your experience of a racially blended family or families in Midland?
I'm a double blended family. So when we moved here in 1993, my mother married a white man who was from Midland, and that was our reason for moving this way. So being a kid from Flint, moving here, super culture shock, a lot of stares, a lot of, is that your dad? You know, I got that a lot. But I think for me, it's my life. So, you know, at first you see it, and then after a while, you either don't pay attention to it, or, you know, it's a small town. After a while, you knew the white guy's my stepdad. It's the best way to explain it.
Right.
Now, with my wife, we've been, like I said, we started dating in high school. This is my high school sweetheart. So for the most part, no one's ever really said much to us. I mean, we've been together since the beginning of time, as far as I'm concerned. So, you know, for the most, it's just our family. That's pretty much it.
So, Brandon, I have one more question for you. And this really is a futuristic question, right? When you think about Midland in 5 years and what a more racially equitable Midland would look like, what do you see?
I believe the next 5 years in Midland are super crucial. for the diversity boards, after the untimely murder of George Floyd last year, it seemed like every corporation, every company, every person jumped on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon and decided, this is what we're going to do. It's up to us to hold their feet to the fire. That is not just a tagline. We will not be used just as a footnote or for you to, raise a flag. So I think on that side, that'll be huge. I love what Dow is doing under Jim Fitterling and Miss Sharon Carter. They are super huge in inclusion and diversity. I have two younger, which is my third point, bringing more Black people here and especially younger folks. Mm-hmm. I have two gentlemen, one I believe is 25. I have another one who is graduating from North Carolina A&T. He has not even graduated yet, and he's coming up here to be an engineer, and I'm working on getting him a house. And we really need that younger African-American group to move this way. Midland is an older city. I think the average age here is 58 last time I looked. That's not a growing city. So I think that's our bigger thing. And our third thing will be probably my generation, figuring out how we stay here after the kids graduate. A lot of my friends, as I like to say, the moment I walked across the stage, my mom had her bags packed and she was on the first thing smoking. Great education. And that's what it was. It was a safe place for me to live and to grow up. And but getting that, to have those mentors, to have those, as we call them, the OGs, someone to talk to, like Mr. Holloman. I'm on a board with him. He's someone that we can speak to who's been through a lot of the things that we're going through. Having someone in your community. Ernie Carter was in the school when I was there, which I absolutely love Mr. Carter. Kept you nice and safe, but also someone that could kind of pull you over to the side and say, hey, we kind of have that brother conversation, if you will. You know what I mean? With being one of only, 2-3 Black children in the school, no Black teachers, not a Black principal, it was nice to have Mr. Carter there. So yeah, that's how I see the next 5 years. I believe we'll grow. I think we just need to have that tug, but it goes back to a want to. Dow needs to want to. Midland Public School needs to want to. You can't tell me there aren't qualified Black teachers. They're there, but you have to go get them.
Brandon, thank you so much. And as we shift the panel to sort of some open discussion, right? We'll spend a few minutes because I imagine some of you might have taken some notes on comments that you'd like to make on one another's topics. I'd like to kick us off because I had one statement that resonated with me personally from each of you. So I just want to open it up to sort of kick it off, and anyone else, right? If you've got a question of another panelist or a comment, please share. But for Dr. Jones, the comment that she made, we methodically joined organizations to spread our influence. That is a timeless lesson and message. Aaron, when you said reparations without a plan does not create sustainable wealth and financial literacy. Timeless. And Brandon, you said it about 4 or 5 times and I can't get enough of it. The resources are here. We have to want to. So please, everyone on the panel, if you had other thoughts or questions, the comments that you'd like to share, let's spend another 5 or 7 minutes just with some open discussion.
I did have a question for Dr. Jones. I know that I spoke to several families that were here like in the 70s, 80s, and they had some different stories in regards to the treatment of Blacks here, in regards to maybe, having the N-word, like spray painted on the garage. I know I heard stories of, burning crosses and, just being called the N-word by itself. So did you ever experience that, or were you just, because you were kind of like some of the first ones, you were still kind of like a phenomenon, you kind of came and everybody's like, oh wow, this is, and then so I just wonder how that, because I know I spoke to people that had that happen, so I just wonder if you ever went through that, or were you just not you know exposed to that?
No, no. In fact, we had things painted on our house from the child who lived next door. I didn't say these things didn't happen. They
Right.
did. And there was name calling. And we knew that there were some kids who were harassed and called names, etc. What I discovered, of course, is that it even happened with our sons, but they didn't talk to us about it until they were adults. Okay, so we didn't know all of that when they were in school. However, what I did say, and what I still say, is that I think it's a matter of education, a matter of getting to know people. Our house was like Grand Central Station. I mean, it was a place to be. My basement, I could not have furniture in because I had two sons and they did everything down there. They had camps, they did wrestling, they did everything. So through the relationships of them and their parents, okay, and I learned my neighbors through my kids, because they would say, oh yeah, that's Alan's mother, or this is Charles's mother, or whatever. I really think, and this may come from my upbringing, I know that we have a new generation now and you look at things differently, but our thinking was that we needed to get out there and be there, be where those things are going on. I think it makes a difference if we're sitting on somebody's board, or if we are out there actually working with them on something. And I think it makes a difference if we draw them into working with us on some things. That's how, in my view, you build relationships and build community. That's how they become more sensitive. A lot of stuff people do simply because they're ignorant. Okay. I mean, it's simple as that. So when I say that I felt like my biggest challenge was education, I did. I found the same thing in my classes at Delta College, and I was at Delta for 25 years. And when in the later part of that, I was vice president of instruction. And one of the things that I brought about was what we call learning communities, where you've got different people together. You got a couple of teachers who are not only instructing, but involving those young people together on mutual projects. I think more of that needs to be in the schools. I don't think kids learn from listening to you. I think kids learn from working together, from having to produce something together that's a common goal. And yeah, the things did happen, Erin. And by the way, I just loved what you had to say. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, I appreciate you for answering. I just asked that question because I know sometimes people that are trying to learn what we've gone through in this community, I like to make it really transparent so people understand that it was not always easy, and so just to share that. So thank you so much for answering that.
Well, there's one story that I do want to share that I think is really a good one, because the Ku Klux Klan has had several rallies here, actually. But the first one that I remember, and I cannot tell you the year, we actually had a meeting to see, we knew it was coming, and to see whether or not we should respond in some way. Actually, we decided not to. No, I take that back. One person wrote a letter that came from all of us. But on the other hand, there were several letters from members of the white community that they didn't want that in the town. And I thought that that was a very healthy response. Now, they had the right to be here, but people just didn't go. So.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the panelists here?
I do have a comment. I was really struck by what Brandon said about you have to have a reason to do it. You have to have the will to do it. And my observation has been that many white folks don't have to think about race, right? I mean, so, and the people in Midland who are mainstream are just not intimidating at all, because it's like, well, you're like us, right? I mean, you're like us. And so it's those other people that, you know, we have a problem with. But one of the things that I think happened as a result of last year is that more people are really starting to think about the concept of race and even institutional racism, which was almost unheard of as a concept. And the reality is that what white privilege is not having to think about race. When if you are a person of color, you think about it all the time. And so I am struck. So you have maybe now, I mean, that is the hope, is that there will be an incentive to really think about race and what that means and everyone's role in eradicating racism.
Barbara, don't you think part of that is though that we actually have to be there? I mean, I really believe that. People can stay unconscious as long as you allow them to. And when we are in those places, I think that we have to speak up. Sometimes, you know, something is going on and you know good and well that there's an underlying, I don't know what I want to call it, whether feeling, motive, but probably not motive. It's just the way they have always done things. And I think we have to bring that to their attention. I really do. And there are nice ways to do it. I don't think people are really mean or vicious or hateful, actually, except that sometimes I think they may feel threatened too. When we speak out, and I've been told many times when I first came from Washington, which is a political city, as you well know, I mean, you say what you're thinking, right? Well, I was saying what I was thinking, and they said I was too sharp, that I was too direct. Okay, so I tell you, I did learn how to say things in a meaningful way, but less perhaps putting people to blame. But that can be effective as well. And I just think that the point that Brandon made, that we need more people of color. We need them everywhere. We need them in the schools. We need them. We need them we need them in our churches too. But the biggest thing I think is to have them in the schools. And at one point we did have a very critical number of African Americans teachers and one counselor. However, and that was so important. But, you know, people retire and they go do something else. I'm retired too, and I love it. I really do. They won't let me stay still, but I'm trying to be retired. But I do think that with young people, we really need to have them understand that they have been invested in. We invested in these. When we first came to Midland, I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, and we were started in 1978. One of the first things we did was to start programs with our young people because we did not want them to feel isolated. And that was the thing, you know, you can get overlooked for a lot of things because you're not part of that group, okay? So we taught them a lot in terms of Black history. We wanted them to know who they were, where they came from, and that they didn't have anything to be ashamed of. I have heard kids say, well, you know, how come I'm brown? Or why do I have to be brown? Well, honey, brown is a good color, you know, and it's got a wonderful history. And we want you to know that and be proud of it. And I think that, and I think I talked with you about this earlier, we need to give ourselves some credit for the work that we've done. Every last one of us has worked in investing in Black kids. I know that Nobuche works with kids in Saginaw. The chapter that Smallwood was in has done tremendous work in Saginaw with kids to get them interested in science, etc. We worked with kids to have them know who they were. We tried to give them experiences in college, preparing for college. We did joint workshops with our kids and Saginaw kids, and I know that Delta has done your programs, which you call what, Super Saturdays. They were wonderful. But every last one of us has been in the pits. We've been out there working. So, you know, I I don't feel guilty. I might be part of the what do they call it?
The mainstream.
Yeah, might be part of that generation. But we were highly invested in, and we were left with the thought and the knowledge that we had a responsibility to make further investment. And I think we've done that. I do.
Mhm. You know, that's an excellent point of transition. We'll transition from the panel questions because we have quite a few questions coming in now from the community. And so I'm scrolling through here and actually transition. So one of the first questions is actually hearing from Dr. Betty about how the community worked hard to make Black families feel included in the 70s, partly due to the leadership from Dow, compared to the experiences of Erin just 20 years ago and Black residents more recent to Midland. Was there a shift? Can we actually name what contributed to this change in the culture surrounding inclusion efforts in Midland?
Who do you want to answer that?
We can have a couple of people answer.
Okay.
Who would like to go first?
Where is
Dr.
Linda?
Oh, I just like being voluntold. You know, I don't know if it's an obvious shift, but one of the things that I would probably say is, and I can't remember the exact name, if it was Proposition 13 or Proposition 209, because California had something similar. But I think when the attack on affirmative action took place, I think that's when some of the shift began, because many, at least that's my opinion, and I haven't done the research on that. That's a very good question. But I would think that I noticed some changes, at least in my workplace, where many people were deciding that certain things they didn't really have to do to make people feel included, or to have targets on bringing in minorities or women or African Americans to fill jobs. It was kind of interesting. And so then you had this discussion about, you know, the federal government still had affirmative action, but the state did not have to really honor that. And my wording about this may not be 100% correct, but that was the gist of it. So that's what I would say the shift started to take place. At least to me, it was noticeable, because then people really weren't that invested. They didn't think they had to, which goes back to Brandon's comment where there are resources, there are things available, but people have to want to do it. And there was really not really any incentive anymore.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Jones.
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, as a younger, because the book is talking about different, you know, subsets, and for a lot of people, my generation and younger, we kind of fought back against like what we call code switching, or saying certain things a certain way to kind of be accepted and kind of like ease in and just kind of be there, but not stand out. I think that's part of what happened too, is that, you know, because when you look at throughout history, there was a fear to almost stand up for certain things, because you would be targeted through different, you know, white supremacist groups and things of that nature. And I think that after, you know, a certain generation, especially in my generation and, you know, younger, people don't have that same fear as much. Not saying that all, but I'm just saying that same fear. So it's this idea that I can use African American vernacular English. I don't have to say, I can say ain't, I can say, you know, I can speak this way, and that's okay. We don't have that same type of mindset that, you know, that I have to be just right. So that code switch. So I think once you start to kind of rebel or kind of rebuke what someone is telling you that you have to do to conform, that also causes a shift, because then people get upset because you're not being good as like kind of like what Ms. Barber spoke about, when because I've had people say, well, you're kind of a good one. And I'm like, a good one? What is that? So, you know, people become comfortable because you're kind of safe. And once you become safe no longer, then people get upset because now you're stepping outside the lines that they try to create for you. And you're saying, no, I don't have lines. I can kind of do what I want. So I think that's part of it too, in my opinion.
You know, one theory is that when the pioneers came, the trailblazers, they weren't a threat. you know, it was just a few of them. We're letting them hear kind of as an experiment. Don't really want a whole lot, but you know, and so there was no threat. But now, when you're really looking at making changes like to the school system and hiring more people into as teachers, it's like, now wait a minute, hold it. That's a bridge too far. We're not really ready to go there because that's impacting us, right? I mean, that is the perception of taking away something from us. And so I think part of what has happened is this resistance to share power with other people, and one group, a majority group, holding on to that power and not being willing to share.
Another thing too that we've noticed is that the number of African Americans in Midland, percentage-wise, has not really increased too much. It's sort of stayed. Once the initial group came, and I think the height might have been in the 70s or the 80s, it's kind of remained at that same number. Now, whether that's by design or it just so happened to be that way, again, that's another interesting point to go along with Barbara's comment about the power, making sure that, you know, it's not that big of a shift.
Well, I have two thoughts. I do think that, you know, considering how I grew up in that community, and we were pushed and encouraged and invested in. And when we did get there, make it, when we got into the, you know, when we walked into the doors, we moved, you know? I mean, I can remember my neighborhoods where, you know, we didn't have a whole range of professions, but we had doctors and teachers and lawyers and so, and you know, they could live next door to you. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had access to those people because they were our neighbors and they went to church with us. And so we had models, you know, that we could follow and we could talk to and learn things from. But when we got to make some money and I have to identify with Erin. You know, I didn't know what wealth was until wealth, not money, wealth, until I was an adult and out of college. Hear me? When you learn that, and I learned that from how people begin to invest, okay? And having something to pass on to your children and their children, your grandchildren. So all I can say is I think that we moved and we learned, but we did leave some people behind. We did not live there. And I think that part of that is got to be a matter of access. We need to make ourselves more available in neighborhoods, in places where kids are that who need us. And that's my point of view. And when I think of reparations, somebody mentioned reparations. I've read all kind of stuff on reparations, and I have to admit that I'm conflicted about that. I don't know how they would be used. What I would like to see, if there are reparations, is that our people would be given more opportunities. They ought to put a big fund somewhere where we could train our kids, see that they got to college, see that they had productive work, and follow that through. Because, you know, we did that in our own communities. And I have to admit that I don't think I have paid much for the education that I have gotten. I've gotten scholarships and I am grateful for them. And like I say, I feel like I owe a lot. But you know, that needs to happen for others too.
So panel, I am going to give us the 2-minute warning. I have one more question about actually diversity and inclusion on the school board. And it's actually, I believe, for Brandon, being on the diversity and inclusion board. How receptive do you think Midland and the public schools are regarding incorporating the teaching of the true history of the country in the school?
Well, I always say at Midland, you learn McGraw-Hill. That's what we learn. I believe the time has come. It's one of the reasons why I love being on this board. The push is coming. It's going to take some time. Like I said, Midland, we love our meetings. It's going to take a second, but I thoroughly believe it's coming. We will start teaching more of the history. I saw it this year inside of my son goes to Plymouth Elementary. They did a lot more than usual. So I think the push is here, and we just, as Dr. Betty said, we just have to keep pushing. We have to stay there. We have to keep going.
Very good. So everyone, this actually will conclude our panel discussion and Q&A for this evening, but the conversation is absolutely not over. We have provided numerous resources to supplement exploration of this book and these ideas, starting back in January of this year with accessibility to the book and many other resources. So we have partnered with the Midland Public Library to make the book available to the community for those who have memberships there. The book is available for purchase on discount at Detroit City Books. We are hosting a 4-episode podcast series featuring community members like those we invited today, exploring other chapters and aspects of the book. We have developed a book discussion guide for you, the community, with thought-provoking questions to support your further education, exploration of the book, either for yourself or in groups. We have a recording of our chapter members on the Joyce Harvin Community Conversations radio show, talking about this event and providing some additional perspective. And today's event is being recorded, if you hadn't noticed, and we will also make this available in the coming days as part of our resources. All of these resources are located on our chapter website at www.midlandmidst.org on the upcoming events page. We encourage you to use these resources and continue to engage with us on our chapter Facebook page, listed as @MidlandMIDST, which is designated as a community organization on Facebook. And forum number two, which is tentatively set for Wednesday, April the 28th at 7 p.m., will occur and continue this discussion, focusing in 2 ways. So as many of us talked today about the importance of taking action, that forum will focus on community organizations, inviting them to attend the forum, share their racial equity plans and aspirations at a very high level, and get visibility to one another for critical community collaboration, as we need a full court press effort to truly make a change here. And then also in forum number 2, we will provide opportunity for individuals in the community to take action and personally commit to racial equity in our community. So we ask that you share this event and all of our supporting resources with all of your social and professional circles, and encourage people to visit our resources and register for Forum 2 when it opens in about 2 weeks. Remember, you can visit www.midlandmidst.org on the upcoming events page for updates in the coming days. Once again, I'd like to thank our partners at the Midland Center for the Arts and the Midland Area Community Foundation Cultural Awareness Coalition for their assistance in producing today's event, as well as our wonderfully esteemed invited panelists. So Mary, we will transition to you to close the event.
Lisa, you did such a fabulous job in closing. Again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the Midland Center for the Arts, the Midland Area Community Foundation, and your technology support. And we just want to encourage people, again, to review the resources and just remember that during these trying times, it is important that we, as an African-American community and allies, that we support each other, knowing that we are stronger together through all of our layers, all of the separations and divisions. We are stronger together. So thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.